Steve and Bill and Ray for all the hard work that you've done here in Bedford. It's great to be back before the BRC. Got a lot of good friends in Bedford, and so it's great to see familiar faces and maybe some future friends as well. Lori Sanborn is here. It is great to be here, and I've attended many of the McGinley barbecues as well, though this will be my first one this year attending as a candidate, so I guess I have to actually dress up for it this year. But certainly looking forward to the pulled pork that we have in the summer. I come to you tonight from the little land of Litchfield, not too far down the road, though I actually had, Cliff told me he was a little concerned because he heard I was the main speaker, and he said, Kevin, I thought you were from New Hampshire. Yeah. It was a Cliff joke.
It must be in the delivery.
Remind me never to sit next to Cliff first again before I go up to speak. But my wife Susie and I, we've called Litchfield home since 2004, though we actually both grew up in Londonderry, right next door to Litchfield. But we moved there in 2004. We have 3 young kids, Colby, who's 7, Lindsay, who just recently turned 6, and Tommy, who's 3, or as we call him, Tommy Tornado, for anyone that's ever had a 3-year-old. And actually, and I apologize if some of you have heard me say this little anecdote before, but before I had officially announced we were all riding in the car together, and I said to the kids, I said, so guys, Dad's thinking about running for governor. What do you think about that? And immediately my daughter, who's 5, says, I don't think so, Dad. I was a little taken aback by this, and I said, well, geez, how come, Lindsay? And she said, because, Dad. She goes, I've seen you run, and I'm pretty sure there's others who can run faster than you. On the mouths of babes, how true it is. So now I'm around them officially walking for governor. But my foray into New Hampshire politics got started pretty much at the ripe old age of 19 when I ran for the State House from the town of Londonderry. And I was fortunate enough to be elected to one of 7 seats, and I served on the Judiciary and Family Law Committee at the State House, and served 1 term before I gave myself a bit of a voluntary retirement. I had a quick lesson in economics that I couldn't really survive on $100 a year. I don't know how some of the other reps in here have done it for so long. But also I was putting myself through school at the time. I was taking night classes through the University of New Hampshire. And so shortly after I stepped down from serving in the House, I got a job with Senator Bob Smith. And I was his liaison to public safety and law enforcement agencies. And I worked on Bob's staff for about 4 years before he lost his re-election bid, you may remember, to then Congressman Sununu. And so then after working on Bob's staff, I went to work for Governor Craig Benson. And while I was there, I served as Craig's liaison to the Executive Council and also to the executive branch commissioners and department heads, helped make appointments to various boards and commissions there. And worked for Craig for his 2 years before then he lost his re-election bid to now Governor Lynch. And I sort of started feeling a little bit like the typhoid mirror political campaigns at that point. So, and plus my wife and I were starting our family, and so she said to me, maybe you ought to get a job where you're not losing it every 2 years. So I was very fortunate to land at the Department of Health and Human Services, and I was appointed to our state's Division for Juvenile Justice Services, where I served under then Commissioner John Stephen, and was eventually appointed to be Deputy Commissioner of that, Deputy Director of that particular department. It was a $30 million department, and oversaw the finance division within there, and also the quality assurance team. And so I was at Juvenile Justice until early 2009, when then I did something a little bit crazy. And I say it was a little bit crazy because if you remember at the time, in the fall of 2008, the economy was starting to tank and people were losing their 401ks. We were bailing out the banks. And I went and decided to become the executive director of a nonprofit group called Cornerstone. And at the time, Cornerstone didn't have a whole lot of funding to its name, and people maybe questioned its effectiveness from time to time. But I went in there with a vision and a plan for how we were going to be the most effective advocacy group in the state. And I did it because I was very concerned about the direction the state was going in at that time. Remember, the Democrats had had control for 4 years. We've seen the largest spending increases during that time, the largest tax increases, and I felt there needed to be a good, credible voice that was pushing back a lot of these policies they were trying to push through. And really our success, the proof is in the pudding. In the 3 years I was there, we nearly quadrupled our membership from about 2,000 to 8,000 people. We grew our revenues tenfold. When I stepped in, our high water level was about $100,000, and in 2010 it was 1.2 million. And Business New Hampshire magazine did recognize us as being the most effective advocacy group in the state. And I'm very proud of the success that we had there. And I would just note this as well. There's no candidate in this race that knows the records of Maggie Hassan and Jackie Silly better than I do. Because I fought against these two folks tooth and nail against all of their policies that, as Governor Sununu would say, are ruining or were ruining the state of New Hampshire at that time. You had the LLC tax, the tax on campgrounds, the tax on lottery winnings, the bathroom bill, the meals and rooms tax, the helium balloon tax, all of these crazy things. And as Ray pointed out earlier, we're going to be in for the fight of our lives, regardless who their nominee is, and we're going to need a fighter to be our nominee. And I can guarantee you this, if I am your nominee, I will not cede any ground to either one of these two, because I know their records that well. Nonetheless, I stepped down from Cornerstone in October of last year, and now I'm running for governor. And the reason I'm running for governor, it's very simple. I want to see New Hampshire lead the country in being the most economically competitive state in the nation over the next decade. And in my opinion, there's no reason we can't get there. But the next governor needs to understand, number one, what the challenges are that are currently facing us from getting there. Number two, they've got to have bold ideas and new solutions, innovative solutions for how we're going to meet those challenges. And number three, they need the background and the experience of knowing how to get things done in state government and showing they have a track record of getting things done in state government. And so we need a governor that's got a long-range vision and a specific plan for getting us there. And that's been really the centerpiece of my campaign. And in fact, this week we rolled out part one of my economic development plan called New Hampshire's Future is Now. And it's how we're going to lead the country in job growth, in economic development, and making healthcare more efficient and more affordable. How we're going to bring down electric rates and have a long-term energy plan, and how we're going to modernize state government and make it more efficient and streamline a lot of what's going on in there. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the points of my plan this evening. The first part of it is, we have one of the highest corporate tax rates in all of the country. Overall tax burden, we're actually not that bad. We're about 44th in the country for overall tax burden. If you added up everything from sales tax, income tax, corporate tax. But when it comes to corporate taxes and business taxes, we're one of the worst between our business profits tax and our business enterprise tax. Our business profits tax is 8.5%, and we have this business enterprise tax, which taxes businesses on payroll. We tax businesses in this state right now that don't even make a profit, which hurts entrepreneurs. They're maybe thinking about starting up businesses. They don't make money the first few years, but we tax them no matter what, even if they don't make money. And to me, that's not right and it's not fair. The other problem is we're strangling small businesses to death. We have so many rules and regulations right now on small businesses in this state that there's many folks that have folded up shop because it's just not worth running the business anymore, because they're always getting penalty notices, whether it's from DRA or whomever up in the state agencies in Concord. They feel that there's too many regulations. So the first thing is I've called for a reduction in our corporate tax rate. I've called for phasing down our business profits tax from 8.5% to 5% by the year 2020. And also phasing down our business enterprise tax from 0.75% where it currently is to 0.25% also by the year 2020. And that's where it originally started out. And then completely eliminating the business enterprise tax on those businesses that don't do more than $500,000 in gross revenue and aren't making a profit, because we really need to stop taxing those businesses. And then on the regulation side, I visited Red Hook Brewery not that long ago. They're actually the second largest brewery that we have here in the state. They're over in the Portsmouth area. And I went there because I had read an article in the paper that talked about how they're the largest East Coast distributor for their beer here on the East Coast in New Hampshire. But we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in business right now because we have these crazy regulations on the state level that don't allow them to brew certain flavors of beer, if you can believe that. And so they're doing all of this manufacturing. They produce these certain flavors of beer in Washington State, and they then ship it to Massachusetts, where they're leasing refrigerated warehouses right now to store the beer in. Now they can sell it in New Hampshire, you can buy it here, you just can't produce it here. And there's no rhyme or reason to why we have these regulations on the books. But the fact of the matter is that we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in business that we could be doing right here in the state of New Hampshire. And oh, by the way, we're losing that in business taxes. We could have more revenue, but because of these crazy regulations, they can't do it. So thankfully, and I have Lori Sanborn actually to thank for this, the current legislature came up with a study committee that's looking at a lot of these small business regulations, and they're going to make recommendations. And Lori, I would say whatever you guys come back with for recommendations, we should implement at least 50% of them, because we've got to show to the rest, not only to the businesses that are here, but to the rest of the country that we are a business-friendly state here in New Hampshire. So we do that by reducing our corporate tax rate and getting rid of a lot of these onerous regulations on small business. Second challenge I bring up too are the two migrations I like to talk about. One is the migration of our young people out of this state. We're losing young people in this state at an alarming rate. And all you have to do is look at the recent census numbers and it bears it out. Last year, New Hampshire passed the state of Florida in median age. So we now have a higher median age in the state of Florida. No thanks to Cliff Hurst over here. But Cliff, you deserved it after your 20-minute speech. But no, we need to really find a way and get creative and get smart about how we're going to keep our young people in the state. We have great schools here. You know, we've got Dartmouth College, we've got UNH, the Whittemore School of Business, St. Anselm College right around the corner, Plymouth State College. But once these kids leave these schools, they're not staying here. You know why? Because the jobs aren't here. And so we've got to get smart about putting students on a career path that they can have jobs to go into once they leave here. And we're going to do that once they graduate. And we'll do that by forming these private-public partnerships between businesses, corporations, entrepreneurs, and with the universities, the community colleges, and the trade schools. You know, we have a deficit right now in the number of students going into the trades area. There's so many jobs right now that want good, highly skilled trades per students going into those jobs. And by the way, these are jobs that are paying $50,000, $60,000, but we're not putting enough students on that track. You know, and I've always said, a four-year degree, it's not for every student. There are some students that are very good with their hands, but we're not pushing them enough into those areas. Hypertherm, which is a manufacturing company up in the Hanover area, they do amazing stuff up there. They do precision metal cutting with plasma and laser technology. It's really incredible. They manufacture everything right here in New Hampshire, though they ship it worldwide. They've partnered with the community college there, and the community colleges has created a track for students to go on it for 2 years, and when they complete the track, they get a job right at Hypertherm. So that right when they're done with their schooling, they know they have a job that they're going into. And this is a win-win in two areas. It's a win, number one, for the businesses, because they know that there's a greater skilled pool of labor that they're going to be able to choose from in these areas where they need them the most when they're talking to the schools. And number two, it's a win for the students because they get to stay right here in New Hampshire, raise their families here, and you know, create their home and their life here. And that's what we need. We need to keep more of our kids here. We're only going to do that by creating the good, sustainable jobs of the future in high-tech, manufacturing, healthcare, financial services. The other area, the other migration I like to talk about, are the number of people that have to commute out of state every day to go to work. New Hampshire is 49th in the country per capita on the amount of people that commute out of state every day to have a good job, to make a good wage. Any guesses to which state is the only state in the country that has more commuters per capita? No, it's not Delaware. Close.
Jersey.
It's Maryland. And they're all going to our favorite place, Washington, D.C. But here, they're all going to Massachusetts, because that's where the good, high-paying jobs are right now. You just stand on the borders of Route 3, 93, 95, you see all the New Hampshire plates going into there. Oh, and they're paying mass income tax. My dad's one of them. He's commuted to Boston his whole life. He moved the family up here in '86. It's not because he hasn't looked for comparable work up here, but he hasn't ever been able to find it, so he goes into Boston. But we're not being aggressive enough in recruiting companies and businesses across the border into New Hampshire. We need to be doing more of that. And guess what? We'll make it a lot more attractive when we start reducing our corporate tax rate, when we offer business incentives, we reduce the regulations, and we're aggressive about calling the CEOs. You know, I would want a call list on my desk every week of CEOs in Massachusetts and say, hey, have you thought about doing business in New Hampshire? Why or why not? And how can we help you out to bring your business here? Because New Hampshire shouldn't just be the best place in the country to live. It should be the best place in the country to both live and work. And I've often said I want to be Deval Patrick's worst nightmare. You know, I want him to know that I am going into his state every week and talking to the businesses in there and telling them why they ought to be doing business in New Hampshire. And you know, a few weeks ago when I was at the Republican governor's winter meeting, I got a chance to meet Scott Walker in Wisconsin, and he's quite a guy. But he's done an amazing job of this in Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has cut business taxes there. And meanwhile, Illinois is moving in the complete opposite direction. They're raising hiking taxes. So guess what he does? He talks to companies every week in the state of Illinois and says, why don't you come to Wisconsin? Because we're moving in the right direction. We're doing the right things to make it a more business-friendly environment. And then the last point I want to touch upon is this area of government modernization. You know, our state government, it still operates in the 20th century. We're constantly ranked by Governing Magazine and all of these other, the Pew Research Foundation, of having a D or an F in government inefficiencies. We don't do things, a lot of things aren't even online still. The example I always use is, you could start a business today from your iPad or your laptop, whatever, in your living room in the state of Delaware. You want to open up a business in the state of Delaware, do it from your living room today. You can't even start a business in New Hampshire from your living room in New Hampshire. And there's all this paperwork you got to go up to the Secretary of State's office to get, make the right, I mean, it's so cumbersome right now. And so we need to modernize state government and make it more transparent and more accountable to the taxpayers. And that's one of the things I did when I was an administrator at juvenile justice. When I went over to the juvenile justice system, first question I asked when I went in there was, because I didn't know a lot about the agency, but I said, what's the recidivism rate here? You know, how many kids come in, they're being rehabilitated, they leave, and then they come back? And no one knew the answer. Nobody had the answer. We weren't even measuring it. And we had data, but we weren't doing anything with the data. I said, how is it that we're a $30 million state agency and we're not even measuring the recidivism rate? So I went online to look around the country, what other agencies were doing this kind of thing, and found South Carolina had come up with this taxpayer accountability report card, where they're doing just that. They were measuring the efficacy of all of the different programs that they were funding. They had metrics, they were looking at the return on investment and seeing where it was working, where it wasn't working. And so I'm not afraid to steal a good idea. I took their idea, brought it to our quality assurance team, and I said, we're going to do this. We're going to replicate this and have this as an internal measurement to know how we're doing in our department and what programs are working and what programs aren't. Within a year, we had our first recidivism rate, finally. It was near 40%, which to me was pretty startling, and maybe that's why we weren't measuring it. But the fact of the matter is that we now had a baseline to go from to see what programs were working and what programs weren't working. And if I were governor, I would tell all my commissioners across all departments, we're going to have a system of metrics in the departments to look at and measure the efficacy of all of the programs that we're funding on a state level. And to me, this makes for smart budgeting as well. You know, especially for the legislature, because the legislature wants to know what's working and what's not working. You know, wouldn't it be great if all the departments could go before the legislature and the fiscal committee and say, here it all is, guys. Here's all the programs you're funding, and here's the efficiency levels and the efficacy levels of all of these different programs. And then the legislature can make their cuts, if they're doing cuts, based on these metrics, rather than saying we're going to do 10% cuts across the board. Well, if Fish and Game, for example, is operating at 90% efficiency levels, and HHS is only at 60%, well, you go after where the waste is, go after where the inefficiencies are, rather than giving everyone the same cut. So I think it's a very smart thing to implement a system in state government like that. So I've talked to you about what I see as some of the challenges that are preventing us from getting to being at that most economically competitive state in the country. I've given you some of what my ideas and solutions would be, and as I said, you know, it's going to take more than great ideas, though. It's going to take someone who knows how to get it done in state government, and that's where my wheelhouse is. Having served in the legislature, obviously I know how that process works, and you got to work with the legislature and all this. You can't just rule from on high. You know, there's 424 of them, and they have their own ideas as well, but you got to know how to work with them. I've served in the executive branch, know how to work with the executive council. As I told another group, I even know where the secret bathroom is in the governor's office. And then I've served the state's largest agency. I've seen the good, bad, and ugly of state government and know where things are working well right now, but also where we need to make good reforms as well. And then I fought for good policy on the outside. You know, the governor's office, it's a 2-year term. So there's not a lot of time for on-the-job training. You better know what your plan is when you're going in there and how you're going to execute it. And I feel that is where I am uniquely qualified for the position. So with that, you can find out more about my plan at kevinsmithforgovernor.com. You can go on there, sign up for our emails, or make a $5,000 donation, whatever tickles your fancy that day. And with that, I'll be more than happy to take any questions you might have. And thank you for